The prairie wind carried with it the smell of dust and cedar smoke, drifting low across the wide land where shadows stretched long at dusk. The horizon burned orange as the sun fell, and with it came a silence heavy enough to unsettle even the strongest heart. It was in that silence she stood, her breath quick against the weight of her fear and hope. The world around her felt older than time, carved by storms and rivers, and bound by promises whispered under the open sky. She had never known her path would cross with his, an Apache warrior whose presence felt like both danger and salvation. And yet, fate had brought her here, to a moment that felt larger than life itself. He stood a few paces away, the light catching the hard lines of his face, his dark eyes watching her as though he carried the burden of her soul in his keeping. His scars told stories of battles fought not only with rifles and arrows, but with hunger, betrayal, and the endless fight to protect his people. He had sworn his life for hers, not because she had asked, but because something unspoken had bound them together in the stillness of that day when death had nearly claimed him, and she had chosen to defy it. The oath lingered between them now, strong as steel yet tender as the beating of her heart. She felt the heat rise in her cheeks as she remembered how their journey had begun. He had been chained and marked for the noose, his enemies eager to display him as a warning, a symbol of conquest. But she had seen beyond the ropes and the jeers, beyond the dust and hatred. Something in his eyes had silenced her fear, something deeper than vengeance or pride. She had acted before her mind had time to reason, loosening the bonds, guiding him through the shadows, and risking everything she knew. Ever since that night she had lived with the knowledge that her life was no longer her own. It was tied to his, and his to hers. Though neither dared yet to speak the truth aloud, the trail they had taken was not kind. Across wild rivers and through thorn-choked hills she had followed him. At times he walked ahead, silent and watchful, a figure carved from the land itself. At times he lingered near, guiding her with a touch on her arm, steadying her when her strength faltered. She had seen his patience, his discipline, and the fire that lived beneath his calm. She had also seen his pain, when memories of loss flickered across his face in the quiet moments before dawn. What startled her most was how safe she felt with him. The same hands that had drawn the bow and wielded the knife were the hands that shielded her from storm winds and lifted her gently across jagged rocks. His presence unsettled her in ways she could not explain, stirring questions she had never dared ask herself. The land they crossed was full of threats, soldiers on patrol, settlers with suspicion in their eyes, and the harsh indifference of nature itself. But it was her own heart that frightened her most. She remembered the night when rain swept over the plains, soaking the earth until it shone silver in the moonlight. They had taken shelter beneath an overhang of stone, close enough that the heat of his body eased the cold that bit at her skin. She had tried not to shiver, tried not to betray how her thoughts tangled around him. Yet when his cloak brushed against her shoulders, when his voice told her softly in his own tongue that the storm would pass, she had felt something awaken inside her. It was not the storm that she feared then. It was the truth that she was no longer untouched by the world's fire. The days grew longer, the miles heavier, but their bond deepened like roots beneath dry soil. She asked him questions in broken words, eager to understand his ways, his people, his silence. Sometimes he answered, his tone low and steady, painting images of a life she could scarcely imagine. Sometimes he only looked at her as though the answer was too heavy for words. Yet in his gaze she found something stronger than speech, an understanding that went beyond language, beyond the divisions of their worlds. Her family's warnings echoed in her mind, the voices of those who said such paths could only lead to ruin. But each step away from her old life felt like freedom. She had not meant for her heart to betray her, to swell with every glance he gave, every moment his shadow shielded hers. She had not meant for her soul to recognize his. Yet here she stood, trembling with the knowledge that it had. The night was falling once more, and the stars pierced the heavens like watchful eyes. They had stopped beside a stream, the water whispering as though it carried secrets from the mountains. She knelt to drink, her hands cupping the cool water when she felt him behind her. His presence was steady, a wall against the night's chill. She turned, her eyes meeting his, and the silence between them tightened like a string ready to snap. Her lips parted before her mind could stop her. The words left her in a whisper, fragile yet certain, carried on the breath of her trembling heart. I am a maiden. Go slowly. The air seemed to change, heavy with meaning, and he stilled as though carved from stone. His eyes burned with a fire both fierce and tender, a promise and a warning bound in one. For a moment, the world around them vanished. The stream, the stars, the long miles ahead, all faded, leaving only the weight of what lay between them. She did not know what he would do, what path he would choose in that fragile space where fear and longing met. All she knew was that she had spoken the truth, and there was no taking it back. The land was wide and wild, their enemies many, their journey far from over. Yet in that breath, everything had changed. He took a step closer, the earth seeming to hold its breath beneath his feet. His hand rose, not to seize, but to hover just near hers, as though seeking permission from the very air between them. His vow to protect her had been sworn with his life, but what grew in his eyes now was something no oath could bind. The night deepened, the stars waiting, the river whispering of secrets too ancient to name. The choice hung heavy in the stillness, fragile as glass, fierce as fire. She could feel it. The moment before everything was set into motion, before the world itself decided their fate. And then, with the darkness pressing close, with her heart pounding like a drum in her chest, the sound of a branch snapping in the distance shattered the stillness. They both turned, the spell broken, the danger near. The sharp crack of the branch carried through the night air like a warning, pulling both of them into a silence heavier than before. She froze where she knelt by the stream, her hands still wet from the water, while his eyes swept the shadows beyond the tree line. The sound had not been an animal's careless step. It was deliberate, too heavy, too close. The prairie could be cruel in its silence, but it was never careless in its noise. Her heart raced as she waited, every nerve alive with fear. He moved with the same precision that had kept him alive through countless dangers. One hand reached for the bow lying within arm's reach, his fingers curling over the worn wood as naturally as if it were part of him. His other hand motioned her back, a silent command that made her throat tighten. She wanted to ask, to speak, to beg for an answer, but she kept still. She trusted his instincts more than her own. He had carried her through storms and through trails where every rustle of grass could mean death. She knew better than to doubt him now. The night wind shifted, carrying scents faint but sharp enough for him to read. Smoke, faint leather, sweat. He knew then they were not alone. Settlers, soldiers, or worse, men without a flag, whose greed turned the land into hunting grounds for whatever they could claim. He had seen such men before, drifters with rifles who thought of nothing but their own gain. His jaw tightened as he listened again, his ears catching the faintest stir of movement against dry leaves. She watched him, her breath shallow, her body tense. She thought of the choice she had made, the choice that had led her here. If she had never loosened his bonds, never risked everything to free him, she might now be safe in her father's house, her hands folded, her world small and certain. Yet the thought of that life made her chest ache. She had chosen this road, chosen him, though fear pressed her heart. And now she waited, knowing danger was closer than ever. The moon slipped behind a cloud, and in the dimness he took her hand, pulling her gently but firmly away from the open water. His touch was steady, strong, grounding her, even as fear whispered at her ear. They moved together into the shadows of the trees, the stream fading behind them as they climbed a slope scattered with rocks and scrub. Each step was careful, silent, his body shielding hers as though he could take on the whole night, and whatever threat it carried. When they reached a thicket, he stopped and crouched low, his eyes on the path they had left. The land below looked quiet, but quiet was never safe. She could not see what he saw, but she trusted the stiffness in his shoulders, the sharpness in his gaze. He whispered then a word she did not know, yet the tone was enough. Be still. Wait. Listen. Time stretched long, the silence broken only by the distant call of a night bird. She thought maybe the sound had been nothing, just her fear making shadows larger than they were. But then, faintly, she caught it too. Hoofbeats. Slow. Careful. Someone else was moving under the cover of night. Her stomach turned cold. Riders. If they were soldiers, they would not be alone. If they were drifters, they would not be kind. She looked at him, her eyes wide, searching for an answer. His hand found her wrist, holding it firm, steadying her even as the danger crept closer. As the hoofbeats grew faint again, fading into the distance, she let out a breath she had not known she was holding. But his expression did not soften. He knew better than to trust silence. He had seen men circle prey before, slipping around in the dark to close in. He would not let that happen here. He motioned again, this time leading her deeper into the trees. The land grew rough, the path hard, but she followed without question. Her skirts snagged on thorns. Her feet stumbled on stones. But he was always there, his hand steadying her before she could fall. It was as if he carried the weight of 2 lives on his shoulders and bore it without complaint. As they moved, she thought of how little she truly knew of him. She knew he had lost much, that his people had been pushed from their lands, hunted and betrayed. She knew his silence held more truth than most men's words. But what else lay in the life he had left behind? A family? A woman waiting? Or had the endless fight taken all of that from him? The questions pressed at her, but she could not bring them to her lips. Not now, when the night itself felt alive with watching eyes. The trees thinned, and before them opened a stretch of land lit by the pale glow of the moon. He paused there, studying the horizon, his figure tall and unyielding. She looked at him, her chest tight with both fear and something deeper. He was unlike any man she had ever known. He belonged to the earth in a way she could not explain, as if the wind itself had shaped him. And yet, despite his strength, she had seen the shadows in his gaze, the weight of a life that had given more pain than mercy. Her thoughts wandered back to the moment by the stream, to the words that had escaped her lips before danger shattered the stillness. She wondered if he had understood, if he had heard more than the fear in her voice. She wondered if the vow he carried for her life might someday change into something neither of them could deny. The thought both frightened and comforted her, pulling her heart in 2 directions at once. He led her on until the land dipped into a hollow where wild grass grew high and the ground was soft beneath their feet. Here he stopped, listening again. The hoofbeats were gone now, the night quiet save for the rustle of wind through grass. Yet the tension in him did not ease. He had learned long ago that danger was never far, and safety was a word spoken only by those who had not yet faced the truth of the world. She sank to the ground, her body weary from the day's march, her heart still racing. He stood watch above her, a dark figure against the starlit sky, his bow ready in his hands. For a long time, neither spoke. She wanted to tell him she was afraid, that she trusted him more than her own breath, that she had no regret in choosing this path. But the words stayed caught in her chest, too fragile to speak in a world so harsh. The fireflies flickered faintly across the grass, and she wondered if he ever let himself rest, if he ever let himself feel something beyond duty. He had sworn to protect her with his life, but what lay beyond that oath? What did he want for himself? When the fight was over, if it was ever over at all? The night stretched on, the suspense unbroken, the air thick with questions that neither dared voice. And though her eyes grew heavy, her heart did not rest, for she knew the branch that had snapped, the hoofbeats that had faded, were not the end of the danger, but only the beginning of what was to come. The prairie held its secrets close, and in its silence, 2 lives moved forward into a darkness where every step carried them deeper, into a fate neither could yet see. The hollow where they rested was quiet, but neither of them truly slept. She lay with her head against the earth, listening to the steady rhythm of his steps as he moved just beyond her, always watching, always alert. Each crack of the wind through grass set her heart beating faster, and though her body longed for rest, her thoughts refused to soften. She kept thinking of the hoofbeats, of the unseen riders who had stalked the darkness. Were they gone, or only circling closer with patience? When her eyes drifted closed, she found herself back at the stream, the memory of her whispered words burning through her like fire. She had not meant for them to escape so raw, but once spoken, there was no taking them back. She wondered if he thought of them now as he walked the edge of the hollow, bow in hand, eyes fixed on the shadows. She wondered if he had understood them as she intended, a plea not just for gentleness, but for time, for the chance to breathe in a world that offered little air for a heart like hers. The dawn came slow, bleeding gray light across the plains. He returned to her side and knelt, his eyes scanning the horizon before he finally spoke. His words were few, but the tone was clear. They must move quickly. Whatever had followed them was not far behind. She rose, brushing the dust from her skirts, and followed him once more. The ground was damp with dew, the grass cool beneath her feet. But she felt no peace in it. Every step carried the weight of the unknown pressing down on them. As they traveled, she began to ask him questions again. She asked about the land, about the names of hills and rivers he seemed to know by heart. Sometimes he answered, pointing to a distant ridge or a grove of cottonwoods, telling her how his people once hunted there, how children had played by the water before soldiers came. Other times he said nothing, his silence heavier than words. In those silences, she felt the depth of what he carried, the loss of a world that had been taken piece by piece until only fragments remained. It struck her then that she was not just bound to him by her choice at the gallows. She was walking through the ashes of his past, through places that whispered of a life stolen away. And though her own family had warned her to stay clear of him, to believe only what was told in the towns, she began to see the truth for herself. He was not the savage they painted him to be. He was a man who had lost more than most could bear, yet still carried himself with strength. That strength both frightened and comforted her, for she knew it came from a place she could never fully understand. By midday, the sun pressed hard against their backs. They stopped by a cluster of rocks where a thin stream cut through, and he let her rest while he searched the distance. She sat in the shade, drawing her knees close, and thought of her family. She imagined her father's anger when he discovered she had gone. She thought of her mother's tears, of her sister's whispers in the dark that she should stay away from men like him. Yet none of that could reach her now. She had chosen differently, and though fear sometimes clawed at her, she did not regret it. When he returned, his jaw was set tight. He had seen smoke to the north, thin trails that spoke of campfires. He did not know if they belonged to soldiers, settlers, or raiders, but it meant danger all the same. He led her southward, toward a line of hills where the land could hide them. She followed, the sun burning her skin, her legs aching, yet she did not falter. Every time she stumbled, he steadied her, and each time his hand lingered a moment longer than it needed to. The hills rose before them, jagged and sharp, and as they climbed, she began to sense how far they still had to go. The land stretched endless in all directions, and she wondered if they would ever find a place safe enough to rest. He had spoken once in rare words of reaching a canyon where his people sometimes gathered, a place hidden and sacred. Perhaps that was where he meant to take her. But could such a place truly be free of danger? She doubted it, yet she clung to the thought as though it were a promise. That night, the wind carried voices, faint, distant, but enough to chill her. She froze, her hand clutching his arm as the sounds drifted closer. Men, laughter, rough and sharp, carried across the land. He pulled her into the shelter of a fallen tree, pressing a finger to his lips. She did not breathe, did not move. As the voices grew clearer, she could make out words now, talk of horses, of whiskey, of the hunt. Whoever they were not soldiers on patrol. They were men who traveled for their own gain, men who found joy in taking what was not theirs. The voices passed, fading into the night, but the fear they left behind clung to her. She looked at him, searching his face, but his expression remained calm, carved from stone. Still, she could feel the tension in him, the way his hand gripped the bow tighter. the way his body stayed coiled as if ready to spring. She realized then that this was his life. Always watching, always listening, never resting. And now it was her life too. The days that followed blurred into one long stretch of tension. At times she thought she caught sight of shadows on the horizon, riders too far to name. At times the night seemed too quiet, the silence pressing in like a warning. Yet through it all they moved together, their bond deepening in the spaces between words. She began to see not just the warrior, but the man who carried memories of his childhood, of laughter by rivers, of songs sung around fires long gone. He did not tell her these things outright, but she caught glimpses in the way his eyes softened at the sight of an eagle circling high, or the way his hand lingered on a tree as if greeting an old friend. A part of her longed to bridge the distance between them, to reach through the silence and speak the truth she carried in her heart. But each time she tried, the weight of their journey pressed against her, reminding her that danger was too near, that words could wait. Still, she knew the truth could not be buried forever. It was there in the way her pulse quickened when his hand brushed hers, in the way her breath caught when his eyes found hers in the dark. As the sun set one evening, they reached the crest of a ridge and the land opened wide before them. In the distance, she saw the faint glow of firelight, flickering like stars fallen to earth. Her heart leapt with both fear and hope. Were these his people, waiting in the canyon he had spoken of? Or was it another camp, another threat waiting to strike? He did not say, only stood beside her, his face unreadable as he watched the distant flames. She wanted to ask, to beg for answers, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she waited, her hand brushing against his as though seeking strength from the touch. He did not move away. The night air grew heavy, the firelight distant but unyielding, and she knew that whatever lay ahead would test them both in ways they could not yet imagine. The bond they had built was strong, but the world around them was stronger still, filled with dangers that could break even the bravest of hearts. And as they stood there on the ridge, the glow of fire burning in the distance, the question hung heavy in the air. Were they walking toward salvation or into the jaws of something far darker? The ridge stretched beneath their feet, the wind pressing against them as if it too carried warning. Below, the flicker of firelight pulsed steady, faint but visible in the vast night. She could not tear her eyes from it, her chest tight with a mix of longing and fear. He remained still beside her, gaze locked on the distant glow, his breath steady though his body bore the sharp edge of tension. She wanted to believe the camp ahead meant safety, that it was the hidden canyon he had spoken of, a place where his people might still gather. But the silence between them told her he was not certain. The firelight called to her, a beacon in the dark, yet also a trap waiting for the unguarded. She imagined men sitting around it, rifles leaning against saddles, their voices low as they planned what to do with any who stumbled too close. She imagined the way they would look at her, the way they would look at him. The thought made her blood run cold. He moved then, crouching low, scanning the land with an intensity that silenced the night itself. His hand brushed the ground, feeling the soil, the tracks pressed into it. She saw his jaw tighten. Someone had passed this way recently, more than one rider, their horses heavy from long travel. He did not speak, but she read enough in his eyes. This was no camp of his people. Her breath caught. If not his people, then who? Soldiers? Settlers? Or the lawless men they had heard in the night? Whoever they were too close. He motioned her down from the ridge, leading her into the shadows of the rocks below. The climb was rough, the stone cutting at her palms, but he stayed near, guiding her with a steady hand. They found a hollow in the rock where the wind died, and the darkness held them close. From there they could see the fire without being seen, the glow steady against the black horizon. The night stretched slow. She could not rest, though her body begged for it. Every time the fire crackled in the distance, her heart leapt, waiting for voices, for the sight of riders climbing toward them. He remained crouched at the edge of the hollow, his bow across his knees, eyes never leaving the camp below. The firelight reflected in his gaze, hard and unblinking, as though he could pierce the dark and see every secret it held. She thought of asking what he planned, if he meant to approach the camp or circle wide around it. But his silence kept her still. He was waiting, watching, weighing every choice. And she realized then that their journey was no longer just about escape. It was about survival, about outlasting whatever hunted them in the shadows. As the hours passed, the fire grew smaller, the glow dimming as if the camp was settling for sleep. She let her head rest against the stone, eyes heavy, though fear kept her from drifting far. In the stillness, her mind wandered back to the beginning. To the noose around his neck, the jeers of the crowd the moment she had stepped forward when no one else would. She had not known why she did it, only that she could not stand still while he was silenced forever. She had seen something in him then, a strength that went beyond chains and ropes, a fire that spoke of freedom. Now, with danger circling closer, she wondered if that fire would be enough for both of them. The dawn broke slow, the sky bruised with purple and red. From their hollow she could see the camp clearly now. There were 3 tents, horses tied, rifles stacked near the flames. Men moved about, their figures sharp against the light, too many to face alone. She looked at him, her voice low. "What will we do?" He did not answer right away. His eyes narrowed, studying the men, the lay of the land, the paths that might carry them unseen. Finally he spoke, his words quiet but certain. They could not turn back, nor could they walk through openly. To survive, they would have to move carefully, slipping past when the sun fell again, when shadows stretched long enough to cover their trail. Her stomach turned at the thought of waiting another day so close to danger. Yet she nodded, trusting his judgment. She had trusted him from the beginning, even when it had meant abandoning everything she had known. The day was long, the sun relentless. They stayed hidden in the hollow, their bodies pressed close to the stone, listening to the sounds of men below. Laughter, rough voices, the ring of metal on metal. At times she caught the sharp crack of gunfire as they practiced their aim, each shot echoing across the land. Each sound felt like a reminder of what waited if they were caught. As the heat pressed down, she thought again of her whispered words by the stream, of the way he had looked at her in that moment before danger had broken it apart. She longed to return to that stillness, to speak the truth her heart carried. But now, with voices and gunfire below, the chance for such words seemed far away. She wondered if he thought of it too, if he remembered the tremble in her voice, the plea wrapped in her whisper. When the sun began to sink, painting the sky in shades of fire, he stirred. His hand found hers, steady, firm, guiding her to rise. The time had come. They would move in the shadows, slipping past the camp, silent as the wind. Her heart thundered, her palms slick with fear. But she followed. They moved slow, each step measured. The ground was rough, the grass brittle beneath their feet, but he led her with the ease of a man born to the land. His body shielded hers, his movements precise, as if every sound, every breath was part of his plan. She clung to him, her eyes fixed on the horizon, praying they would reach the other side unseen. But then a horse whinnied, sharp, sudden, carrying across the dark. She froze, her blood turning cold. From the camp came the sound of men shouting, the crack of boots against earth. He pulled her down into the grass, his hand pressing gently against her back, urging her still. The voices grew louder, closer. Torches flared, their light sweeping across the land. Her breath caught. They were searching. He lay beside her, his bow ready, his body tense as steel. She could feel the heat of him against her, the steady rhythm of his breath even as danger pressed close. She wanted to speak, to say she was not afraid so long as he was near, but her voice stayed trapped in her chest. The grass around them shifted as men passed, their shadows long against the firelight. The night stretched thin, every moment heavy with the risk of discovery. And as she lay there, her heart pounding, she knew they had reached the edge of something far greater than either of them could control. The fire, the riders, the vow he had sworn, all of it was pulling them toward a moment that would decide everything. She turned her head just enough to see his face, his eyes fixed on the men who searched the dark. In them she saw not just the warrior, but the man who had chosen to protect her with his life. And in that gaze, fierce and unyielding, she felt the storm building, the clash waiting just beyond the shadows. The tension coiled tighter, the danger closing in. The prairie seemed to hold its breath, the stars watching from above, the night alive with the promise of what was about to come. And though her body trembled, her spirit did not waver. She knew the path they had taken could not be undone, and whatever came next would test not only their strength, but the truth of the bond that had carried them this far. The torches drew nearer, the voices sharper, the sound of rifles carried on the wind. The moment of silence before the storm had come, and all that remained was to face it. The night pressed down heavy as the voices closed in, the torches swaying like restless stars across the prairie. She lay in the tall grass with her breath caught, her body trembling but her spirit unwilling to yield. Beside her he held still, every muscle poised, his bow drawn back with quiet strength. The men searching were close enough that she could see the flicker of firelight on their rifles, close enough that one wrong move would bring the storm crashing down. For a long, breathless stretch, the hunters circled but did not see. They cursed under their breath, the sound of their boots stirring the soil, their shadows sweeping across the grass. She clutched the earth beneath her fingers, praying it would keep her hidden. And then, as sudden as the danger had come, it began to fade. The torches drifted back toward the camp, the shouts softened, the hoofbeats drew away. The men had given up the chase for the night, convinced that the shadows held no one but the wind. Only when the glow of firelight grew distant did he ease his bow, though his body stayed coiled like a spring. She turned her head toward him, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and awe. His face was calm, though the fire in his eyes told her he had been ready to fight to the death if it had come to that. She realized then that his vow to protect her was not only words, it was a truth he carried into every breath. They rose from the grass, moving silently away from the camp, keeping low until the ridge shielded them once more. Her legs ached, her lungs burned, but she followed without complaint. She understood now that their journey was not about comfort or ease. It was about survival, about outlasting the dangers that circled them at every turn. And though she had chosen this path, it was his strength that carried her through it. By dawn they reached the edge of a canyon, its walls steep and carved deep by time. He paused there, his eyes scanning the cliffs, the sky above, the shadows below. At last he spoke in a voice that carried both certainty and weariness. This was the place. Hidden, sheltered, a refuge for those who knew its paths. Relief washed through her, though a part of her still feared what might wait in the shadows. They descended carefully, the rock sharp beneath their hands, the air cooler in the canyon's depths. At the bottom ran a stream, clear and steady, its voice softer than the storms they had weathered. She knelt by it, drinking deeply, the water cooling her dry throat. For the first time in many days she felt a hint of peace. In the quiet that followed, he spoke more than before. He told her of how his people once lived in these canyons, of the songs sung here, of the fires that once lit the walls with warmth. He spoke of raids that had scattered them, of battles that had left graves where laughter used to be. His voice did not break, but she could feel the weight of loss pressing against every word. She listened, her heart aching, and in that moment she understood more of him than she ever had before. He was not only a warrior, he was the memory of a people carrying their stories, their pain, their hope. She reached for his hand, not with words, but with a quiet touch. He did not pull away. Instead, his fingers curled gently around hers, steady and warm. It was the first time he allowed himself to hold on, not only to protect, but to share. The days that followed in the canyon passed more softly than those on the open trail. They built a fire by the stream, shared what food they carried, and rested in the shelter of the cliffs. At night she watched the stars above, brighter than she had ever seen, and thought of how far she had come from the world she once knew. She no longer belonged to the house she had left, to the rules and warnings whispered in her ear. She belonged here, in the wild, bound to the man who had sworn to protect her and who had, without words, claimed her heart. But peace was fragile, and they both knew it. One evening, while gathering wood, he found fresh tracks leading toward the canyon's mouth. Horses, men, the same hunters who had circled them before. The danger had not been left behind. It had followed, patient and relentless. When he returned, his face carried the calm of a man ready to fight, though she saw the storm behind his eyes. He told her plainly that the time had come when they might have to face their enemies. She felt the fear rise in her chest, but she did not run from it. Instead, she stood taller, her voice steady though her hands trembled. If the fight came, she would stand beside him. That night, as the firelight flickered against the canyon walls, she thought again of the moment by the stream when she had whispered to him, "I am a maiden. Go slowly." The words had been fragile then, but now they held a different meaning. She had asked for time, for gentleness, for space to find her place in a world larger than she had ever known. And in his silence, in his patience, he had given it to her. Now, standing on the edge of battle, she felt ready to face whatever storm awaited. The clash came at dawn. The sound of riders filled the canyon, their voices sharp, their rifles glinting in the morning light. He stood with bow in hand, his body poised, his eyes steady. She stayed close, her breath quick, but her spirit unbroken. The men dismounted, their boots striking the ground, their eyes sweeping the canyon as they advanced. The air was thick with tension, every sound magnified, every breath heavy. She clutched his arm, her eyes locked on the figures closing in. In that moment, she understood the depth of what bound them. It was not only the vow he had made to protect her, not only the choice she had made to save him. It was something deeper, something that grew from every mile they had walked, every danger they had faced, every silence they had shared. It was a bond carved from trust, from fire, from the simple truth that they needed one another. The riders drew closer, their torches burning bright against the pale dawn. The canyon walls seemed to hold its breath, the earth waiting for what would come. He tightened his grip on the bow, his body ready, his gaze locked forward. She held his hand, her voice steady, though soft. "I am not afraid." And though the danger towered before them, though the storm was about to break, there was strength in that moment. Strength in the vow that had begun this journey. Strength in the love that had grown quietly, steadily, against all odds. The canyon filled with the sound of boots and fire, the clash only heartbeats away. But within that heartbeat lay the truth of their story. That two lives, bound by choice and by courage, could stand together against the world. And as the first shout rang out, as the world tilted toward the fight that would decide their fate, she knew that whatever came, their bond would not be broken. The prairie wind rose, carrying with it the smell of fire and earth, and the story of the maiden and the Apache warrior pressed forward into the dawn, their lives forever tied to the land, to the vow, and to each other.